Hello, how are you today? It's great to have you here. Welcome. As usual, I want to start this video with a question, and it's a question that might sound familiar to you. And the question is, how long does a midlife crisis last? Because this is one of the main questions that we want the answer to when we are in the middle of it, right? And I know that I asked myself this question pretty much every day for a very long time. Just how much longer? I did some research and I found that there is some sort of average duration for a midlife crisis. So in this video, I'm going to look at what that duration is. But the main part of the video, I'll be looking at two very specific things that need to happen in you for a midlife crisis or for an identity crisis to end. So I found a website from the UK that gives an average timeline for a midlife crisis, which is 3 to 10 years in men and 2 to 5 years in women. And maybe hearing those numbers killed your joy because it's a very long time, right? But of course, they are generalizations. They're not set in stone. They can be useful as a reference, but from personal experience, I can say it's quite accurate. For example, in my case, I was there for 6 years, just over 6 years. And when we go through this type of process, we can't put it on a schedule. The more we try to fight the timeline or to accelerate it or to rush through it, the longer we'll be stuck in it. And although there's no guarantee as to the duration, how long is it going to last, but there is a guarantee about what I've just said, that the more you try to rush through the process and to fight the timeline, the more stuck you will be. And yes, I know that when we're in the middle of the mess, what we want the most is for it to end. So I want to talk about what actually ends a midlife crisis or an identity crisis. So there's no fixed duration for this, but there are two thresholds or two conditions that absolutely need to happen for that process to end. Once you cross those thresholds, the crisis cannot continue. It will just naturally finish. It will not finish overnight, but you will definitely notice a difference in the intensity, in your level of clarity, and then things will start to gradually dwindle. So the first condition has to do with what I call that terrible thing. This can be a belief, a dynamic, a defense, a misconception, a pattern, a narrative, a way of explaining your life. It's something that you think, something that you do, that's very, very, very enmeshed into you, into your history, into your story. And I call it terrible because this thing on repeat does absolutely terrible things to you, to your options, to your present, to your future. And it's terrible because it makes your life as you live it unsustainable. And this is where some of that existential exhaustion that is so common when we go through this type of process, this is where it comes from. Now, the important thing about this terrible thing is that it's not always obvious to find out what it is. Sometimes it is obvious. Sometimes it can be, for example, a belief like I'm not enough, which keeps you in dead-end relationships or in pointless jobs. So this is pretty obvious, yes? It's once you start to dig a little, you see it. Or it could be a narrative like I'm broken, I'm faulty. It could be a dynamic of always trying to rescue others or to fix others. So these are all pretty obvious, terrible things. But more often than not, that terrible thing is not obvious. And it's not obvious because we build a set of justifications around it. And these justifications are as damaging, if not more, than the terrible thing itself. So it could sound like I'm just being realistic, or this is who I am, and I've always been like this, or this is how it is, it will always be like this, or I'm too late, or it's too late, or there are more important things, etc. These are just some examples. What all these things have in common is that what you're really saying to yourself is, I'm not going to change that terrible thing. So I'm just being realistic, meaning I'm not going to change. This is who I am. So I'm not going to change. I'm too late, or it's too late. so I'm not going to change. There are more important things, so I'm not going to change. This is how it is, so I'm not going to change. So what you're really saying is that this terrible thing is essential. It's such an important part of you that you can't live without it, but you can. All these lines, they seem rational or logical, but what they really are is the linguistic camouflage of that terrible thing. And because we keep it camouflaged as something logical, as something reasonable, the crisis is not going to go anywhere, because you are not going anywhere with that terrible thing. You're sort of cuddling it, you're keeping it very close to you, consciously or not. So a midlife crisis will last as long as that terrible thing gets energy from you and you get energy from it, which means that a midlife crisis ends when you stop feeding that terrible thing, when you stop identifying with it, when you stop sustaining it, when you see the total and the real cost of sustaining it in your past and in your present. And when you see this, instead of making excuses or giving the usual justifications, you say, I can't do this anymore. And you don't just say it, because for the crisis to end, this cannot be just an intellectual realization, it's something somatic. You feel in your body, with your body, I can't do it anymore. Full stop. No, yes, but full stop. And that's when the first threshold is crossed, is when the first condition is met. Now, the second condition has to do with that one thing that I talked about in my last video. I'll put the link somewhere here and also in the description box. So we can think about a midlife crisis as a process where there are two opposing movements happening. There's one that's pulling you away from something, so away from that terrible thing that we were just talking about. And the other movement is pulling you towards something else, towards that one thing that I mentioned in my last video, which is something in you or about you that the crisis has been trying to deliver for as long as it's lasted so far for you. But guess what? There's no room for this delivery, because the space is taken up by the terrible thing. Because somehow you've been saying, no, I prefer terrible. I know it's bad, but I really prefer it, consciously or not. I said in my last video that that one thing has three faces, or it can show up in three different ways. So watch it to know what I'm talking about. I don't want to repeat myself, but the real job here is making space for that one thing without excuses, without yes buts, without justifications, without delays. For that very important thing to emerge, there needs to be 100% openness to it. If we try to negotiate that one thing with that terrible thing, or if we try to negotiate with old narratives, that one thing is not going to take root in you. So you will continue struggling with that crisis. And I know this because I negotiated for years. And honestly, most of the time was wasted. It's only, and only with big capital letters, when these two conditions are met, so letting go of that terrible thing and fully opening the door to that one thing, not just a crack open, but fully opening the door, that the crisis naturally and organically ends, because it has no more purpose, because the movement has been settled. So how long does a midlife crisis last? As long as it takes for those two things to happen, for that terrible thing to end. And it's not something that ends on its own, it's something that you have to actively make happen, and not conceptually, but physically and energetically, it has to end. And for that one thing to finally have room to exist in your life, in you. We often hear that time heals everything. Time alone doesn't end this type of process, this type of crisis. You could be there forever. waiting for time to fix it. So if you're still caught struggling in the first threshold, if you haven't moved past that first condition of making that terrible thing end, you will love my upcoming course, The Coded Keys to Self-Rescue, which is not about quick fixes. It's not about rushing through that midlife crisis. It's about exposing the blind spots that keep that terrible thing alive and well-fed, so that you can learn the inner mechanics of self-rescue. Because when old stops having power, new doesn't need to be forced. It just takes its place naturally. If that sounds interesting, I will put a link in the description box where you can register your interest for the course, and I will let you know as soon as the doors open. So to end this video, if you're struggling with a midlife crisis, with an identity crisis, and you're torturing yourself, asking how much longer? How long does this last? Honest advice is don't measure yourself against the clock. And this is from personal experience, knowing that it just makes it worse. And instead, pay attention to whether you're putting more energy into feeding the old, or into feeding the new, or what could be new. So instead of asking, how long does that midlife crisis last? How about we change the question and we ask a better question, such as, how long will I keep feeding what's already ending? And that's all I had to share for today. I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.